What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Michigan Wolverines are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Michigan did in 2024. Here were my projections and predictions last year for Michigan. My projection for this team was pretty high at 11-1, and then my prediction for them was 9-3. So if you're confused about why my projection for Michigan was so high last year, well, I actually did my projection on this team from last year in 2024 pretty early, right before Jim Harbaugh, of course, went to the NFL. But then I changed my prediction, went a little bit lower compared to the projection at 9-3. But Michigan did a little bit under than that. They went 7-5 in the regular season last year, but you could probably say this was a disappointing year. Yeah, it was a big step back from where they were in 2023. But yeah, they finished the season pretty strong. They went 8-5 overall in 2024. It was definitely a step back for them, but I think they should be a lot better compared to where they were last year. And they had a pretty tough schedule. This was that schedule last year in 2024. Again, they were 7-5 with this schedule overall in the regular season. First off, you look at who they played in the non-conference. They played Fresno State, Texas out of the SEC in that big non-conference game, and they also played Arkansas State. So their non-conference schedule wasn't too bad. You know, Texas obviously wasn't really a close game for them, and we thought right after that game that Michigan definitely was not going to be a really good team the rest of the way. And that kind of told us the story there, but then they finished the season pretty strong. But you look at their Big Ten schedule, they didn't really lose a lot of home games last year in the Big Ten. They played USC, Minnesota, Michigan State, Oregon, and Northwestern. So they had 5 home games last year in the Big Ten, and they struggled on the road, though. Their road schedule, they had to play Washington, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio State. So they had 4 away games in the Big Ten last year, and those were pretty tough games on the road. Washington was a pretty tough game, and then, of course, Illinois ended up being really good as we thought they were not going to be. And then, obviously, you had Indiana, which turned out to be a surprise team, but that win against Ohio State, that was a huge win here for this Michigan team. Not only did they defeat the Buckeyes for the second time in a row at Columbus, but they beat them for the 4th consecutive year in a row. Could they make it 5 this year in 2025? But let's get to that schedule here for 2025 for Michigan. This is their schedule coming up for 2025. And before we go game by game, let's take a look at who Michigan plays in the non-conference first. So you look at their non-conference schedule, they will play New Mexico, at Oklahoma on the road, and then they also play Central Michigan. So a couple of cupcake teams in New Mexico and Central Michigan, and then you got Oklahoma here out of the SEC. So in back-to-back seasons, they're playing SEC teams out of the non-conference, but this time it will be Oklahoma. And how about this? You know, before Texas and Oklahoma became official members of the SEC, they were Big 12 teams, so they're playing like former back-to-back Big 12 opponents, from their conference, but they will play them out of the SEC again. Again, last year was Texas at home, but this time they will play Oklahoma on the road. So that could be a pretty exciting game. It could be one of those defensive battles here between these two teams. Last year, both of these defenses were pretty dominant on that side of the football. So yeah, that should be a pretty exciting game in the non-conference, but not a tough non-conference schedule in my opinion here for Michigan for 2025. Let's now take a look at their home Big Ten schedule for the Wolverines. They will play 4 home games in the Big Ten this year. They will play Wisconsin, Washington, Purdue, and Ohio State. So this is a home schedule that sets up pretty well for Michigan. It's not too bad of a home schedule. Wisconsin wasn't really good last year. Michigan might be the better team. You never know. Washington will be a revenge game here for the Wolverines. And then you got Purdue, the worst team in the Big Ten from last year. And then you got the rivalry against Ohio State that you play every year. So yeah, they play the Buckeyes every year, but they've beaten them now like 4 years in a row, even though the Buckeyes still won it all, the national championship and everything. But yeah, this is a rivalry that Michigan has just continued to dominate for the last 4 seasons. So that's your home Big Ten schedule. Let's now go to the away schedule here in the Big Ten. They will play 4 away games in the conference this year. They'll play at Nebraska, at USC, at Michigan State, at Northwestern, and then at Maryland. So Just looking at this road schedule, it is a little bit tough when you got Nebraska on the road. USC, you have to travel out west here in this one. And then you got the rivalry with Michigan State, obviously, Northwestern and Maryland. Michigan State, Northwestern, and Maryland, they were all not really good last year, but they could turn things around this year in 2025. You never know. So, yeah, this is a pretty tough road schedule, but it's not really horrible. It's not really one of those horrible away schedules in the Big Ten Conference. So that's your away schedule. Let's now go back to the schedule here and go full game by game now for the Wolverines. Again, they're going to start with New Mexico on August 30th, and then they'll have that big non-conference game on the road at Oklahoma on September 6th. Then they play Central Michigan on September 13th. So they will play all three of their non-conference games to kick off the season before opening up Big Ten play on the road at Nebraska on September 20th. Then they get their first bye week before playing Wisconsin at home on October 4th. Then it's at USC on October the 11th, then back at home for Washington on October 18th. Then they play on the road against rival Michigan State on October 25th. Then they come back at home to play Purdue on November 1st. Their second bye week actually doesn't come right here before playing Northwestern on November 15th. And then they also play Maryland on November 22nd on the road. So you got back-to-back road games there, a couple of trap games between Northwestern and Maryland. Yeah, those will be kind of pretty tough, but you got back-to-back road games in back-to-back weeks. You don't have a bye week in between them. And then you obviously close things out with Ohio State here on November 29th in that rivalry game. So the schedule is not all that tough for Michigan. You know, it's not really quite as bad as I think it was last year. Last year they had to play Oregon out of the Big Ten and everything, but they don't have to play them this year. They also don't have to play Penn State, which is good news. But you got Ohio State, you got back-to-back road games with Northwestern and Maryland, which obviously could be tough. And then you got USC and Nebraska both on the road. Plus you got Oklahoma in the non-conference. So yeah, this is kind of a tough schedule, but it's not horrible. So let's now get a projection here for Michigan for 2025. This is the scale I'll be using here for their projection. If it's a 1% game in the red, pretty much that's counted as an automatic loss in that percentage. 20% games in the orange will be games where Michigan will be a double-digit underdog, and then your 40% games in the yellow, those are games where Michigan will be a clear underdog in by about a touchdown, about 6 or 7 points, somewhere in that particular range. And then your 50-50 games, those will stay in the white. Games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple, those are games where Michigan will be favored by 6 or 7 points. And then your 80% games in the blue, those are games where Michigan will be favored by double digits. So by about a couple of touchdowns, by 10 to 14 points. And then your green games are pretty much your automatic wins. So we'll start with the automatic wins and the easy wins on the schedule for Michigan. I think you got a total of 3 of those in the green. New Mexico and Central Michigan, your 2 non-conference games. And then you got Purdue out of the Big Ten. Look, I know Purdue is a Big Ten opponent. It is closer to that 90 to 94% mark. It's definitely not over that 95 to 99% mark compared to the other 2 non-conference games, but Purdue wasn't really good last year. They have a new head coach this season. We'll see how they can, how good they can be under this new system and everything. But it's just been downhill for the Boilermakers ever since Jeff Brom left to go to Louisville. Yeah, Purdue has just not been really good in like the last 3 seasons. So yeah, Michigan, I think they'll be favored in all 3 of these games by 17, 20-plus points. I think they'll be favored by 20-plus in those 2 non-conference games against New Mexico and Central Michigan, but they'll probably only be favored by 17 against Purdue because that game, of course, is a Big Ten opponent, but I think Michigan should be able to take care of business. It would definitely be a big shock if they were to lose one of these 3 games. But again, I just do not see that happening here for Michigan. Again, all these games are counted as wins, not guaranteed wins, but they're counted as wins either way in this projection. And I actually don't have any games where I think Michigan's going to be favored by double digits. I think most of these games could be trap games in the purple where they're going to be favored by 6 or 7 points. And I think you got 4 trap games on here in the purple. Wisconsin, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Maryland. All 4 of these teams in the purple did not make a bowl game last year, but they can turn things around in a heartbeat. Wisconsin is a pretty good program, but they have not been really good under the 2 years that they've had Luke Fickell down there, and they're coming off a disappointing season. So I think the Badgers probably can turn things around. You never know, and that's the reason why this game is in the purple. Even though it's a home game here for Michigan, it probably should be in the blue, but I'm going to stick with it here and put it in the purple for right now. Michigan State, obviously a rivalry game. Anything can happen in this one, but Michigan, I think, clearly is the better team still. And this game, of course, is on the road. That's the reason why it's in the purple. And same thing for Northwestern and Maryland. Again, those back-to-back road games are pretty tricky in my opinion. Northwestern, not a very tough place to play, but Maryland's also kind of a tough place to play. Yeah, Maryland might be the toughest road game in that trap game scenario, and then maybe Michigan State also could be tough as well. So yeah, all four of these games, I think Michigan will be favored in, all four of them still by 6 or 7 points, but they're not really counted as wins and guaranteed wins. These are like trap games that really could, maybe slip Michigan up here in the middle part of the season. So yeah, I think all four of these games, Michigan will be favored in all of them by 6 or 7 points. And I don't have any games where I think Michigan will be an underdog. I think you've got 5 50-50 games that can go either way. You got Oklahoma on the road. That's obviously a tough one to call as of right now. I know Oklahoma was not really good last year, but these are two teams that have really two physical defenses. I just think, you look ahead to next year, I think these two teams are going to have really good defensive teams in both of their respective conferences. Nebraska on the road, always a really tough place to play. That's pretty much a 50-50 game, and then you got USC. You have to travel out west here in this one, which obviously could play into a factor here for Michigan. And then you got Washington. Washington beat Michigan last year. That's obviously a 50-50 game. And then you got the rivalry with Ohio State. You never know what can happen in this game, even though Michigan has dominated the series in the last 4 years. So yeah, all 5 of these games can really go either way. So what does the projected record look like for Michigan come out to be in 2025 based on how tough this schedule is? Again, we count the 3 green games as wins, and then you average out all 4 of these purple games at 60%. Then you average out all 5 of these 50-50 games at 50%. Let's say they split them. Let's say they win 3 out of the 5 50-50 games, and they probably slip up in one of these purple games. You lose 2 50-50 games and then lose one of these purple games. That's going to give you 3 losses, and that's what the projected record comes out to be. It's 9-3 here for 2025, so definitely a little bit of a step back of a projection compared to last year. Again, I did my projection for Michigan last season before Jim Harbaugh, of course, went into the NFL. But, yeah, this is a 9-3 projection for this year for 2025. I think this is a pretty fair projection. Again, you've split those 50-50 games. They win 3 out of the 5 50-50 games. And then they probably lose 2 of the, 5 50-50 games and probably slip up one of these purple games. Again, you got back-to-back road games there with Northwestern and Maryland. They could probably slip up in one of those back-to-back road games, or they could probably slip up against Wisconsin at home, or it could be that rivalry game against Michigan State. You never know. These teams that you're seeing in the purple, they could probably all turn things around in 2025. Again, it's pretty early. We don't know what the rosters look like. We don't know who is all coming back just yet. But yeah, the projection for Michigan is 9-3 based on how tough this schedule is. And again, I wouldn't be really surprised if Michigan does make the college football playoff this year, and wouldn't be surprised if they come like a college football playoff contender and then also a Big Ten championship contender. But yeah, I think 8-4 is probably the worst case scenario, and then best case probably 10-2. But yeah, 9-3 is what the projected record looks like for Michigan based on how tough this schedule is and how good we expect each team to be. So that is my projected record here for Michigan for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree? And also give me your thoughts about Michigan's schedule down in the comments below. Is it tough or not so tough? Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.